Thank you for joining us at the No Names podcast. This is episode 40. Yeah, episode 40. We just finished the book of Romans. We're here getting into the Christmas season, so I think we'll be focusing our conversation around Christmas. Hopefully you guys hit the like and subscribe button. We're definitely trying to continue to push to, one, spread the gospel, and then also, we're trying to grow the channel. It's not for popularity-wise, just to kind of keep building the community and just keep growing it from there. So I encourage you guys to keep passing it along. We'll probably start doing some more shorts. I think we uploaded our first short. I think we'll do a few more.
Yeah,
definitely.
If you haven't checked it out, check it out though.
Yeah. It's just a portion of one of the previous podcasts, and so definitely encourage you guys to do that. Again, keep asking questions or start asking questions. Send questions in, whichever means possible, and then we'll be bringing on some more guests as we head into the new year. But we want this to be a community, a conversation, a discussion. Sometimes we're going to agree, sometimes we're not going to agree. And then at times we might be wrong, and at times we might be right. So encourage you guys to be part of it. Again, we wrapped up Romans. We're still looking for suggestions of books to start the new year with, books of the Bible. But I think from there right now, it's again, just thank you guys for your support. And then, we'll just get into the story of Jesus and Christmas and all that good stuff.
Yeah. I don't know. So what did the story mean to any one of you guys? Like the story of Christmas and Jesus, like what did it mean? Because I know what it kind of meant to me a little bit.
To me, Pancho Claus.
No, it can't be Pancho Claus. It got to be something different.
No, it's a remembrance of what. We celebrate. This is when we here in America celebrate, or I don't know if it's all the world, the birth of Christ, because there's always a debate when he was born, and
that's a good question. Is it celebrated in all the world?
Christmas or the
Christmas?
Christ.
Well, maybe not Christmas because they got like different, right?
I think most people celebrate Christmas. The importance of it, I think, is a little different from country to country. But the reason they celebrate it may be a little bit different. Some more once it probably got commercialized. Some celebrate it as the representation of the birth of Christ, which I do think that's always an interesting. We don't know the exact time. Like, this is based on our theories and thoughts and when he was born and things of that sort. But to say Jesus was born exactly on December 25th is probably not the truest statement. But again, I just across the world. I think it varies, but again, you have to remember, like, there's a lot of places where Christianity is not the biggest religion. Like, I think here,
I'm pretty sure they're not celebrating Christmas in China.
I don't know. I think they celebrate a version of Christmas, or they do something like around Christmas, but I don't think it's
really.
But again, I don't think it's. It might have been, because you gotta remember, there's Christmas and then there's the commercialized Christmas. Like the Santa Claus part of Christmas became later on when it got commercialized.
Right.
So there's varying things of it, but we can always Google.
Right.
Right. There's nothing.
Yeah. I don't know, because I just always, now it just became a question for me. Like, is Christmas celebrated throughout the whole world? It's celebrated here in the United States, obviously, because probably even in England might be even celebrated, but is it in the whole world though?
This is Christmas in mainland China is not a public holiday and is not related to religion at all. It's more of a novelty date like Valentine's Day. So it's probably like commercialized part of Christmas.
Oh, wow.
You gotta remember, like, a lot of
Valentine's Day, bro. That's what they compared it to.
Well, because Valentine's Day is a very commercialized holiday. Like, the candy and card industry just said, "Hey,
Okay.
this is a good time to do it." So that's what it means by novelty. I mean, you gotta look at it like from a business standpoint. Christmas is probably one of the
definitely.
booming times because you're
Oh,
giving
definitely,
gifts,
yeah.
and the majority of stuff's made in China. I mean, I'm sure they're gonna promote that aspect of it,
Well,
but
yeah,
it's not.
definitely.
Well, Rudolph flew through all the whole world, taking Santa Claus, drop off presents. So that means
Come on, man.
they celebrate Santa
Come
Claus
on, man.
through the whole world. Even
Wow.
the newer
Now
version
that-
cartoons.
That
Yeah.
is interesting though to find out that they compared it to Valentine's. I mean, I guess in the sense
Yeah.
of what you're saying. Well, hey, I guess it's the day of love. So
Well, I mean, but is it that much different in the U.S.?
no, not really. You
I mean,
really think about it,
There's some
because
that-
it's
there's
totally
some that we-
commercialized.
There's some that hold Christmas for the purpose it was meant to be, and then there's some that it's very commercialized. Like we not everyone. I don't mean just coming to church on like Christmas Eve or Christmas Sunday, which I still do encourage, but
Of course.
it is a very commercialized holiday even here. Like, how many times is everyone stressed about trying to find the right gift, buy the right thing, getting
Man.
this or that, and yeah, I don't know.
Yeah. I don't know.
It almost seems like it's a novelty here in the U.S. too.
Yeah. Well, but
Well-
like in China, that's the government saying that, But I believe the Christians that are in China, because there are Christians in China.
Oh, I believe that.
They're
Yeah.
hidden and all that, and they probably celebrate. Not like us, but that was the day that we celebrate Christ's birthday or Christ
Yeah.
being born. So and I believe throughout the world, wherever there's Christians, they celebrate that.
Do they?
I'm just saying that they.
No, I'm just saying. No, I agree with you. That's the purpose of Christmas. That's the point of the celebration. But do we really take time to celebrate the birth of Christ? Most of the time here in San Antonio, and not to offend, but it's more of we eat some tamales, we wait till midnight, and we open up gifts. Like, do we really stop and celebrate the birth of Christ?
Right.
Yeah, we do. I mean, that's why we come. We have a service. We come and thank the Lord.
Okay. In that aspect, and
And
communal.
Remember that this is the day that we believe Christ was born.
Yeah.
It's just like coming in a Sunday morning service. We come for about an hour or so we worship Christ. Worship God for being. We're thankful for another day and remembering Him, and then we go with our life.
I just might be more cynical because to me that even sometimes here in the U.S. Sunday services.
Oh yeah,
are
no,
novelties.
yeah, a lot
Like
of
they're novel, and the reason I say that is because a lot of times, to your point, people will come Sunday, and I encourage it still. I mean, not Sunday, but will come to the Christmas Eve services and things like that. And not that I'm discouraging that because I think it is good.
Right.
But the private remembrance of Christ's birth, like I think sometimes we don't understand the importance of it. Okay,
Yeah.
so
I think we
like,
overlook it.
But again, I think that's an individual, just like an
yeah.
individual relationship with Christ.
Well, yeah.
Yeah.
Depending on, because it's like everybody, you can't force them to have a relationship with God, or an intimate relationship with God, and that's what I mean. Some people come to church on Sunday mornings, and after that, they think that they done.
That's why I
and
go
then
back
they
to my
leave.
statement of I think sometimes even here in the U.S. Christmas.
Yeah,
has become
yeah,
a
they do.
novelty
Yeah.
because it's.
Yeah, because
We-
sometimes we think more of gifts, more of this and that, and
I was
sometimes we get lost in the.
well because I mean if you look at the birth of Christ, which I think this is a good way to because what exactly are we celebrating, right? I mean you go to Easter and everything and you start talking about Easter, the resurrection.
Right.
People start so at least if you have a basic knowledge of Christianity and the
Right.
doctrines, you
Right.
have an understanding of the atonement,
Right.
the sacrifice, the resurrection. But when we look at Christ's birth, do we truly understand what it was about? I was listening to this guy teaching on the first two chapters of Matthew, and one of the things we get confused, like we skip over sometimes the genealogy, Christ.
All of the names, yeah.
And really, what they were saying was the word genealogy, that when we translated, that's the word that we use because of the way they were talking about it. But he actually used the same word that's used in the very first book of the Bible. He called it the Genesis. In other words, Christ's birth was the genesis of the new man, which is the same thing Paul talked about. Like, this is the second. This is the second Adam. It was a new beginning. And I don't think we always look at it that way. Like, Christ's birth introduced something different, and for Matthew, he's regarding it as a genesis. And he actually calls it a genesis using the Hebrew word for Genesis, which is also used for the title of the first book in the Torah, which is Genesis.
Wow. Didn't know that.
And I think that's sometimes the stuff that we miss, like his birth marked the beginning of that.
Yeah.
I actually think that, I know we were touching on it the last time. Like, to me, I always like the uniqueness of the different stories when people are trying to put on skits and things like that. But I think also sometimes, like, I think churches have been so reserved in the story of the nativity that we don't always tell the fullness of the story of the birth of Christ. Because, I mean, you have scandal there. You have murder, killing. You have suspense, a mystery. You have a lot there, and it's not over a couple of days. Like, all this stuff happened over 2 or 3 years. Like, this is Jesus going from birth to toddler. Which sometimes we imagine everything like in a manger. Like, when the wise men came and the wise man Magi came and saw Jesus, he was already a toddler at this point. Because it says it was about 2 years, because that's what Herod, King Herod, I say Herod sometimes, but King Herod,
the kill, right?
Yeah, well, when he calculated it from when the Magi first saw the star, that's why he killed. That's why he killed all the kids that were 2 years and under. Like, I think we missed that as part of the story. Like,
that's right.
That's a connection back to Moses as well. Like, when they were killing all the kids. There's a lot of connections back to the Old Testament when you start actually looking into it and seeing the interesting parts of the story. Like, the whole thing with Mary and Joseph, I think sometimes we overpass the understanding of that. Like, I think one of the things I've challenged myself more recently is truly like looking at the Bible and understanding it from the Eastern customs, because you got to remember, when the Bible was written, it was written under Eastern customs, not under Western
under
customs.
That time, right?
And when you start looking at like Joseph and Mary and things like that, like, we compare it to being engaged, and so we look at it as, oh, they were engaged, which here in the U.S. and America we see engagements get broken off all the time.
Oh yeah.
But there, they were betrothed. Yeah, they weren't officially married, but they were pretty much there. Like, they were at the point where if Joseph had died, she would be considered a widow. Yeah, like, that's right. So that gives it a whole different aspect. Like, typically, once you were already in that phase, you didn't break it off. You didn't have those type of things, and so it puts a whole
that's crazy.
It puts Joseph and Mary into a whole different aspect, because the Jewish law like says that Mary and whoever she would have if she had an affair, they would have been stoned.
Oh yeah,
like they would have been
stoned to death.
Yeah, like they would have been taken out to a public and stoned to death. And I think sometimes we miss that part of the story, that if you look at Joseph's part of it, it says he was a righteous man or a just man. And again, sometimes we look at righteous from this aspect, but the righteous at that time meant that he was a man that followed the law. So he would have known that if he followed the law, that would have been his obligation to go ahead and report it, because again, that was a stain on him, because it was an offense, right? Yeah, because even if he, like, by him not, he's making the statement that that's not my child, But even if he made the statement that that was his child, that means he broke the covenant because he wasn't supposed to consummate the marriage yet.
Until you get
So
married.
either way, he would have looked like he had broken the law, whether it was by that or that he was offended by the law. And so you look at it and you see, which was interesting that this person, as they were talking about it, you see Joseph understands the law, but he understands the heart of the law. Like he was going to do it quietly so that Mary didn't have to go, Mary and her family, and even himself didn't have to go through the embarrassment of it. Like he was going to divorce her quietly, let her go, and be done with it.
But nope.
But I think sometimes we miss that aspect of the thing because no matter what, rumors were going to be around. Like they were in Bethlehem, they're there, or even before they went to Bethlehem, but they were around family and friends and neighborhood and people that knew them. And during that time, Mary would have been living with her parents, so it would have been either two things: they jumped the gun, which they would have known him to be a righteous man, and it sounds, and that's the thing. Like we have to take our mind out of our current culture, because in our current culture we wouldn't be surprised by it, right? Like that's not surprising. Like someone getting married or being engaged and being knocked up, that's not a surprising concept. But there,
people have gotten married, so.
But there, it was very. It was not common at all. It was very much the exception that someone would have broken that type of vow. And this is not from just biblical studies. If you study the Jewish cultures and you go back, rarely do you ever find that people were really accused of that, because it just didn't really happen. And so to be there doesn't matter. Like we read the story and we're like, okay, but we forget a pregnancy lasts like at least 9 months.
Oh, definitely 9 months.
So that means before they went to Bethlehem and stuff, they're walking around and people are accusing them of two things: either Mary cheated on them, or they broke the vow.
Yeah.
And so that's a whole other aspect of having to live with that. Sometimes we read it and we just go by it and don't think of that piece of it.
I mean, then you think about more, you get more, in depth into the story of it. You think about how she was pregnant and then they had to travel, while she was pregnant. Like that must have been tough, man. That had to have been, really, really tough for a pregnant woman to be traveling. And then when they get to the destination, all of the rooms are taken. Like, they don't got nowhere to stay. Like, where does that happen? Like nowhere to stay. And then somebody offered them to stay in a barn, man. That's just the whole, the story of the birth of Jesus it's crazy, man, when you really think about it.
Yeah. I mean, it's definitely only God could have written such a story because, I mean, look at the centralizing characters. You get Mary, who is not, from what you can tell, is maybe humble beginnings. It's not anyone. If Mary didn't have Jesus, you don't hear of her.
No way.
Joseph,
him too.
Same piece. The only difference I would say with Joseph, which was interesting, is that in the prophecies, there was supposed to come from the line of David. Now, Joseph is not Jesus' father, but yet Joseph is the one that is from the line of David. That's why they're back in Bethlehem, because he's from the line and they're doing a census. And when you look at Matthew and he does the genealogy, he goes all the way back to Abraham and he shows the genealogy of Jesus through Joseph. Now, the one thing that has to be understood from the Jewish custom is that even though Joseph made it aware that Jesus was not his biological son,
right,
he acknowledged him as his son.
Right, of
so
course.
The culture was very different there. I mean, but not so much different here. You have to imagine it of almost like if someone adopts a child here and takes them in as their own. That's what Joseph did with Jesus. By him saying, "This is my son," he made him even though he wasn't his blood, he made him an inheritor to all his stuff and made him part of the line of David because he treated him as a son.
As his own son, right?
And that's one of the things that I think sometimes we miss in that story is that Joseph actually did take in Jesus as a son, even though it wasn't his biological son. And that's why Matthew writes the genealogy of that way. I mean, it's just interesting. If you actually read through the stories of Jesus, I mean, if you read through the genealogy, like it's, you know, there's 4 in the genealogy. There's actually 4 women listed in there, which is not typical to be listed in the genealogy, which is quite.
4?
Yeah, there's 4 women listed in the genealogy of Jesus through Matthew. Here's the quiz. Do you know which 4 they are?
Nope.
All I know, Pancho Claus is going to come and leave me a present.
First of all, you're the last one to talk about mythical people coming to deliver Christmas because you ruined Christmas for kids since, I don't know.
You know, but
let's be very clear. I want to make one point here. I want to be clear. This is not, and I don't really care, but this is the way we grew up. I never had a gift that said from Santa Claus. It was always from mom and dad.
Yeah.
Because there was no way he was going to give credit to someone else. So let's be very clear. Now all of a sudden you want to believe in Pancho Claus. Let's be very clear. That's not even culture and thought process.
But when you look at the names, you know, it just tells us too how when God chooses people, it doesn't mean that life's going to be easy. You know, because sometimes that's what we think, that Christianity, everything's supposed to be smooth, everything's supposed to be, you know, and
I can agree with that.
Because Mary had to make a decision to allow God to use her. Joseph had to make a decision, you know, to allow to be used, you know, and you know, for all this so a savior could come. You know,
well, that's what I think.
And then, you know, the struggles that they went through, you know, going like looking for a hotel or a place to sleep, you know, and they couldn't find one. You know.
I think that's part of like you're saying, like that's part of like when God didn't randomly choose Mary and Joseph. Like he chose these 2 people. Like you see Joseph's heart already.
Right.
Like he knows the law and he has the right to condemn Mary. But this person I was listening to actually made this point here. But Joseph understood the heart of the law. The heart of the law, which Jesus talks about, and then Paul reaffirms, which we just got out of Romans, wasn't to condemn the people, but to show God's love. Like Joseph was showing mercy on Mary and saying, yeah, I know I can condemn her. She's wrong. I'm still going to follow the law and I'm going to divorce her and let her be. But I'm not going to do it publicly where it shames her family and stuff like that. Because I think sometimes what we have to look back there, that culture, it's not like now, like where if you look at certain things where, you know, and probably not as, and I think it's still prevalent, but maybe not as bad. But like before, if someone got pregnant very young or out of wedlock, they were ashamed of what they did and blah, blah, blah. But back there, when it says that it would have brought shame to the family, that means that whole family and their name, they would have been considered outcasts because they broke the law of God. And it was, and so Joseph was showing mercy and understanding the law and saying, look, here I feel like I'm wronged. This is before he knows of it. He says, here I feel I'm wronged, but he understood the law and he was willing to do it quietly and save her family the shame, save her the shame, because he must have really loved her. Like, I mean, we missed that part that he must have really did love her. It wasn't like God just brought these like 2 people together and they didn't know each other, and then all of a sudden they're having Jesus. Like these were people who dated.
No, like you said, they were already like married.
Yeah, they were headed to that point.
Because I think the custom was that they had to wait a year after they did the vows or whatever. Yeah. You know, to consummate. Yeah, consummated. You know, so when God came to them, you know, and that's another thing, like you were saying, Joseph was a righteous man. Imagine when God came and told him to break the law. You know, he was a man that always fulfilled the law. You know, because regardless, like you said, once they found out that she was pregnant, everybody was going to think that he broke the law. You know, unless he told them, no, that's not my baby, that's somebody else's.
God didn't ask him to break the law.
No, you know.
Yeah,
but when he
just
called them,
yeah.
you know, he had to make a choice. He knew that, you know, once he made that choice to stay with Mary, everybody was gonna look at him like, hey,
what's up with you, bro? Yeah.
And now you're breaking the law.
Right.
You know, it's just like us. You know, in the positions we are, people expect us to be perfect. People expect us not to, you know, to make mistakes or you know. Because you're pastors, you're leaders, you know, you're supposed to be, and you know, sometimes we're gonna do things that people might not agree with. You know, they think we're breaking the law of the church or something like that.
Yeah.
You know, and that's what I mean.
Yeah.
Not that God told them.
Yeah.
God gave him a choice.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it was up to him.
Well, I think even, and that's the interesting part about it, because to your point, it was even before that, right? Joseph was already considering it, right? It says before the messenger came to him, he was already considering like letting it go quietly and stuff. And then, like you said, when the angel told him, the messenger of God came and told him that, then he made the decision to.
Because Mary told him first, right?
I don't know.
Was it the angel?
I think it was the angel.
I think it was the angel.
Yeah.
I mean, they had to have had some kind of discussion, because he's not going to stand there and say, well, I mean, he probably just didn't believe her or whatever the case, because that's a hard thing to believe.
Yeah, that's what I mean.
Of course.
You know, if an angel, a woman comes and tells you, an angel told me.
Come on, man. Come on, man.
But it's just like, to your point, like, it's not just about him, it's also about all the people around him. Like, that's like, even like right now, like someone came and said, you know, you're married or something, and someone gets knocked up, and then all of a sudden they tell you, you know, this is God's baby, and you go tell your family like, yeah, no, she didn't cheat, that's God's baby. Like, no one's gonna be like, you're right. You know, no one's gonna believe that.
And you were saying about the importance of the birth of Christ, but it is important. Even though, you know, it looks like Easter, Resurrection Day, when we celebrate the cross and the salvation and all that, you know, we see it as the most important day. But really, without a birth, there would have been no salvation.
Yeah.
You see?
Well, I just
so
think,
it's
I just think
you know,
part of it.
Yeah, but you know, from Santa Claus to a rabbit, Santa Claus is more popular. You know.
Yeah.
Bugs Bunny comes in second. You know, so, but you know, it's and you're right. Sometimes we forget. Sometimes we don't acknowledge you know, the importance of the celebration of what we're gonna do next Sunday.
Yeah.
Or Saturday. You know,
this Saturday.
And you know.
I think it goes beyond that. I think it's more of just like.
But you know, I think it should be again, I think it's a personal relationship and how you see it, you know, and you know.
Yeah, but I think part of it is that sometimes there's not enough explanation of.
Yeah.
Like I think if you look at the Jewish culture, I think part of it was they knew a king was going to be born. They knew it was going to be a Messiah. Yeah. But I don't think they always thought like it was going to be, you know, oh, this person's going to be born and then grow up. Like I think some of them thought, okay, a Messiah is just going to appear and be a full man. But Jesus came and decided to come as a child and live through this, and then picks the most unique way of coming through, like with controversy and things like that. And then
it shattered the dream.
And that's what I was saying. That's what I was saying. Like it's interesting if you read through the genealogy, and sometimes we just jump through the names because we don't always know the Old Testament and we miss it. And a lot of the people that they name had different pasts. But then what's interesting of it is Matthew makes sure he points out 4 women in all of it. One was Tamar, who was who if you read in Genesis, I believe her husband had passed away or something like that, and she had kept telling her father-in-law Judah and he was ignoring her, and then she dresses up like a prostitute and tricks him into having a child. And that's the child who now leads down the line of Jesus. So you go there, and Tamar was not of Jewish descent. Tamar was actually a Gentile.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And then you jump down and you go, and then you have Rahab, which Rahab is the one that hid Joseph's men in Jericho. Yeah. She also was not of Jewish descent, but was actually a Gentile as well.
Oh, wow.
So you have Gentiles through the lineage of Jesus, and Rahab was considered like a prostitute. It depends what translations you use and things like that. And then you go down to Ruth. Ruth was actually a very loyal, and of the four women did not really have a scandalous past. But Ruth was a Moabite, also not a Jewish person. She was a Moabite who chose to stay by
the mother-in-law.
Yeah. And then marry Boaz, who then leads down to King David, which of King David, they mentioned Solomon's mother, who was married to Uriah, a Hittite, who also was not of Jewish descent.
Wow.
And if you remember, this is the lady that David has an affair with, and then has her husband killed.
Yeah.
So of the four people, you have three of them who are scandaled, and you're not sure. I think that's the one, Uriah. You're not sure if his wife is Jewish or not, but Uriah was a Hittite, so there's speculation if it was or not. But of the other three, they were confirmed that they were not Jewish. They were of Gentile descent. And you see Matthew calling this out in the thing, and sometimes we forget that of the different things of the history of Jesus and kind of what played into it. So I think a lot of this was also to play into the understanding, because you got to remember the early church, and we just saw this in Romans. There's a division between the Jews and the Gentiles.
Yeah.
Yet if you look at the history of Jesus, and even before Jesus, this is David, this is of Judah, this is of a lot of them, they married or engaged with Gentile people who they brought into the Jewish custom. And so you start seeing some of that. And that's why I think, of all the things Jesus could have picked, like he knew when he picked David, and he told them through the prophecy, one day a king will come from your lineage who will rule forever. Like God knew the history of these people. Like he knew the line that this was going to run through, which was not always a perfect line. Like Jesus did not, like Jesus' past had history, colorful history,
And I think it just shows us that, because that's, that's most people, when they get saved and then they start serving God, they think that Christianity life should be an easy life. That there's not going to be no controversy, there's not going to be no problems, But life is life. We're going to have circumstances. We're going to go through things, We're going to get discouraged, And a lot of times we're going to question God, why he did this or that.
Yeah.
But through all everything you just spoke about, it was like a plan by God.
Yeah.
God used all that to bring us to the point that we're now celebrating,
Yeah.
the remembrance of the birth of Christ, and what is in April, March, we celebrate the resurrection of Christ.
Yeah, and I think part of it shows that God takes what we do sometimes and makes it into good, because I don't think God ever, like, it wasn't God's plan. In my opinion, wasn't his plan to say, okay, David, you go cheat on this with this woman, so that the Christ can come through that child.
Right.
Like that was not God's plan, but God dealt
God
with
turned
it
it around and used it.
and used it in the same way with a lot of what was going on. But you also see kind of, you know, for anyone to claim pure Jewish blood, like you just see that through the lines there was always different exceptions, different things and things that had happened. And it's just interesting because the culture that goes into it, because the Moabites were people that hated the Jews, I believe. And so you see a mixture of all this kind of growing into that.
It's like even Abraham, when Abraham had that other child, and didn't wait on God's, promise. God didn't reject that child.
No.
God said He would take care of him.
Know
that because, it was a moment of weakness of Abraham and Sarah. And that's the beauty of God. Like you said, God didn't put that thought in David to go and do what he did. But David got tired of battling, of being in the war and all that, and he took a little break. And the next thing you know, life, and only that, he did his mistake, but then he covered it up by killing, having his the husband die. But
and I think that's what's interesting about the story is, and that's why I recommend, this part was from Matthew, definitely looking at it from different aspects. And if you look at it, you see it differently, right? Because, you have Matthew who does the genealogy, takes it all the way back to Abraham.
Mm-hmm.
You have John who opens it up and is more of Jesus is the light of the world, right? And then I think, and if you look at it, when John is writing his about he's the light, he's going back to creation too. Like I just said, Matthew starts off with Genesis, talking about this is the Genesis. We translate it to genealogy, but he was just talking about here's the Genesis. And Matthew was of Jewish descent, so he only goes all the way back to Abraham, because that's where the Hebrews start. The Hebrews start there, and then you break out to the 12 tribes, and the Jews are actually only made up of the tribe of Judah and Benjamin. Like, this is when the kingdom gets divided. You have Judah and Benjamin, which are exiled into Babylonia, but the rest are, the other 10 tribes weren't captured. They were captured by somebody else later on. And so when you look at it, you see Matthew of Jewish descent only goes back to Abraham. If you study Luke, which many believe Luke was Gentile, he actually goes all the way back to Adam, because Adam is supposed to be the first among all of humanity, which includes both Hebrews and Gentiles. Versus Abraham, he has, like, to your point, Abraham has some Gentile because of the break, because not every son of Abraham is considered Hebrew. It was just Isaac that came from Abraham that was considered of the Hebrew descent. Ishmael is not considered Hebrew. So you start looking at it and you see the different things and the understanding of it, and I think that's one of the things. But if you look at it, it all goes tied back. Like, Matthew's talking about a Genesis. John goes back and refers to light, because what happens? You have light and darkness being some of the first things created, right? When there was nothing, God begins to create, and he calls forth light in the midst of darkness. And now you have light and darkness all over know somewhere. This is before he created the sun. He created light and darkness. And then now all of a sudden, then you have Luke going all the way back to Adam and showing the genealogy of Jesus, that Jesus is king of all. And I think when you start looking at that, you start seeing, okay, now this is a unique story. This is interesting. This takes someone seeing the full picture as he writes this story out. Which by that I mean God, like the uniqueness of grabbing Mary, who famous now, but was insignificant at that time.
Right.
Because here's the thing, like, sometimes when you read through the story, I start asking myself the question. I'm like, okay, King Herod knew every kid 2 years and under possibly was the Messiah, kills all of them, or he thinks he does.
Well, I was gonna say, yeah, he thought he did.
But why is this never brought up again, right? Why is this never brought up again when Jesus starts his ministry? Like, why are they not like chasing him down, trying to kill him, saying, wait a second, his age matches up to the kids that were around 2 years? Like, what?
Yeah.
And you see time passes.
But didn't that king that wound up dying though?
Yeah, that king died, but I think it was one of his sons took over.
Yeah.
And if you read through it, that's what you find interesting, right? Like all the prophets, everything was set up for perfect, right? King Herod does that, so it sends Jesus and his parents to Egypt, right? They hear King Herod's dead, and guess where they're headed back? To their home country. They're going back to Bethlehem, but guess what? They hear one of King Herod's sons has taken over, and they're so worried, so guess where they head to? Nazareth, which is an insignificant city that no one knows about. Like, it's so insignificant that one of his disciples would be, what good comes out of Nazareth?
Right, yeah.
But it also fulfills the prophecy that he would be a Nazarite. So you see God intertwine all these stories, all these events, so that it starts connecting to what was going on. Like, Jesus should have been going back to Bethlehem, but because of the son that took over and what they heard, now they're in Nazareth hiding out.
Yeah.
That's why Jesus is, again, later on, like, it's not until the disciples are writing this, Jesus is talking about it. I think you got to remember, Mary joins the congregation when Jesus has passed away. She's there with the disciples. She's around. She's recounting these stories, and they're connecting all the dots and realizing, because if not, when Jesus was first starting his ministry, someone would have said, wait a second, this is a kid that should have been killed during his birth because of all of this. Right. Like, all of this had to fall into place in the perfect part. And sometimes we don't see that piece of the story because all we see is a manger, some animals around, and some shepherds come, and some wise men come.
The nativity scene. Right.
And we miss the whole aspect and connection of all that had to go on for that story to be fulfilled.
Yeah, for sure. I think we do. Because I know that I missed it. Because Christmas for me, like, when I was, especially when you're younger, you really don't really know, man. Is Christmas is all about the gifts. You know, you want to, what you gonna get for Christmas? And just to let you know, I don't believe in Pancho Claus, and I never believed in Santa Claus because my mother would not let me. Or would tell me no, and I bought you those gifts. Right. No, Santa Claus didn't buy it. But I think sometimes we overlook.
I wouldn't think Pancho Claus would be in Cleveland.
Nah, but I think we overlook sometimes the importance of of.
Well, that's why I taught my kids, that's why they got in trouble in school.
I get in trouble.
Like Leticia and them, because they would tell them, no, Santa Claus ain't the one bringing us a present.
Hey,
and the teacher would get after them, no, don't say that because the other kids are there.
You can't be mad. You can't be mad at somebody telling the truth.
It's I always try to teach them. Even though, I allow them to see the cartoons and all that. Yeah. But at the same time, they try to let them know that that was a myth.
Well, there's nothing wrong. Like,
there's nothing wrong with looking at all that.
Right.
Believing in Santa Claus and things like
that.
Because
I sit down with my grandson and watch the cartoons with him and all that, the old ones and all that. But
I think part of it creates creativity and things like that. And again, like, as you get older, then you realize, like, again, there was a Saint Nick. It was about giving out toys. Yeah. But again, a lot of it, if you go back to it, was their studying of the birth of Christ, which, again, when we look at it, we got to remember Christ was a gift to humanity. Like, this was, if you read John 3:16, I think, and it was interesting, this is the piece that I kind of liked about this. Sometimes of the guy I was hearing, and at first, when I heard him say this, I was like, wait a second, I don't, you kind of want to argue with it, and then you kind of listen a little bit more, and you're like, wait a second. I think sometimes we take God out of the Jesus equation because we're so focused on Jesus.
Can't take God out of the Jesus
equation. Just bear with me on this one.
Okay, I'm going to say,
well, because sometimes we get so focused on Jesus. Jesus came, Jesus died, Jesus rose again, Jesus forgives our sins. but we forget that it was God, and they're three in one, right? We believe in the Trinity,
right?
But if you read John 3:16, it says, "For God so loved the world." God gave Jesus. God gave. Jesus was a willing participant. There's a mixture there, and I think sometimes that's the piece we forget, is that there's God's involved in this. That God's the one that we're building a relationship with through Jesus and with Jesus, and we're forgetting God in the equation of it at times. And I think when you start looking at it that way, I think in the past, that's kind of where the St. Nicholas and the Christmas kind of came about, right? God gave us this gift. Jesus gives us a gift of grace and salvation, but it was first that God gave the gift of Jesus by sending his son. And Jesus gave us the gift of salvation by paying the price of being atoned for our sins.
And you know that even Jesus, throughout his time, he always referred back to God all the time, you know. And people would sometimes forget about that you know, God is the one that sent them. The God was the one that gave him the power and all that, you know. And he would always reflect it back to God. And
that's sometimes what we miss, right? Jesus always pushed it back to God, but sometimes we focus, which is not wrong, but I think sometimes in the church, over focusing on Jesus, we leave God out of the equation.
Because there's a scripture that
God is part of the equation.
Wasn't that scripture says, "I and the Father are one"?
Yeah,
you know, and you know, in other words, you can't have one or the other.
Right.
You gotta have both.
Yeah.
You know, and sometimes we forget that, you know, and that's why we should be thankful for the gift God gave us, you know. And you know, the meaning of Christmas, you know, that
I think that's what I learned the most.
And then we should be thankful that Mary, you know, said yes, and Joseph said yes.
And Joseph,
You can imagine if they would have said no. It could have gone all. I mean, God was going to do what He had to do,
of course,
you know, but it would change. You know,
it would change the story, of course, but
and that's why we have to look at it as, you know, God. And again, this is where it gets a little weird and confusing, because the three in one, Jesus has always been in existence. The Jesus that we see and that we know about, that comes in on this birth, isn't that Jesus was just created at that point. Jesus existed. Him, God, and the Holy Spirit are three in one. Like they're eternity. But the human form of Jesus became in existence at that point, right? He takes on a human form. He leaves behind some of his divinity and takes some of humanity. And so now you have Christ here on earth. But the piece that we have to remember, that it, like you were saying, it all points back to God. Like, you got to remember, the story starts and ends with God. Like, it all starts and ends with God. God, the Father, created with Jesus and the Holy Spirit, but He created. He loved humanity. He's been there trying to build a relationship with humanity. God does not stop existing because Jesus comes in. He's always existed.
Right.
And this is the one piece that I found interesting. So because the angel tells both in different books, the angel tells Mary to name the baby Jesus. In Matthew, the angel tells Joseph that his name would be Jesus, which Jesus actually, Yeshua, you go by the Jewish, was actually a common name during that time, which is a derivative of the Jewish name of Joshua. And it's a very common name. But one of the things that they pointed out was that a lot of times we translate as Jesus, Yeshua, as he will save us, or he will save. And it actually means Jehovah will save. The name of God, the name that God gave himself when he's talking to Moses.
Jehovah.
So it clearly is calling out that it's not just Jesus saving us, but it's God saving us. God is the one sent Jesus to save us so that the atonement of our sins could be perfected. And that, I think, for me, is kind of where the Christmas story comes in, because, again, the birth of Christ marks the genesis of what Paul would talk about, what Jesus talks about, what the New Testament talks about, the new creation.
Yeah.
It's a new creation, right? Paul goes very much into depth about the old Adam and the first man, and now the new man, and going into these things. And I think that's, to me, is what we celebrate. Like, Jesus changed all of that. Like, God giving His Son.
In other words, God's gonna do a new thing all the time. Changes, and that's what people are afraid of. Changes. And like that in Luke 1 chapter 1 verse 30, when it says, "And the angel said to her, 'Do not be afraid, Mary, for you have found favor with God.'" I like how he tells her, "Do not be afraid." Because when God comes to most of us as Christians and tells us to do something that makes us uncomfortable, that's not in our comfort zone, the first thing we feel is fear. We're afraid of of doing something new. Because we're used to doing something. I've been doing this for 30 years, or it's been done this way in our church for so many years and all this. And God, and he told Mary, "Do not be afraid." First thing he told her, don't be afraid. And then he told her, "For you have found favor with God."
Yep.
See, that's the beauty. We find favor with God. That's God's mercy. And Mary had a choice, and she said yes. And the rest is history.
Yep. And I would encourage you guys, like, by no means are we saying Christmas is bad. I think you celebrate Christmas.
Right.
I'm still going to eat tamales. I'm still going to open up gifts. I'm still going to watch
definitely.
Christmas movies. I love
Definitely,
Christmas cookies.
definitely.
And open presents and all that.
I think take a moment
Just dig a little
to
deeper,
remember about it. Like, that's the genesis for all of us. Like, for us being called that, like, to me, that's the genesis of being reconnected with God. Because we lost that connection. Like, it was there, but it wasn't as close or as strong when Adam and Eve were thrown out of the Garden of Eden. You see images of God. You see a connection with God at times through certain people and things like that. But then Jesus comes, and when Jesus dies, that solidified our connection to be coming back to God and allowing us to have that personal relationship, which is really the core of it, right? Because I think that's what God always intended, was for us to have a one-on-one relationship with Him. That's what He wanted with Adam and Eve. That's what He calls from the Israelites when Moses is there, and it's what He's constantly called for. And I think Jesus fulfilled that. And to me, that's the genesis of it all. The genesis of the Jesus part of it. And so hopefully you guys take time to remember that as you're enjoying your Christmas time.
Merry Christmas.
With that, keep asking questions and things like that. And I don't have anything else.
No, that's it.
All right, thanks.
We'll be having our Christmas service Saturday.
Yeah, nothing else.
Huh?
You literally just said, nothing else.
Yeah. And Saturday at 6:30, come and enjoy. We'll have sweet bread, coffee, chocolate, and just come enjoy. Like, again, what we're talking about. Let's just come and remember Christ before we go in and celebrate at our houses with our families and all that. Let's come and first give thanks to the Lord for being born.
Yep. Yeah, so that's this coming Saturday, Christmas Eve at 6:30, and then we'll have our New Year's Eve service the following Saturday at 6:30.
And that's it.
Sure?
Yeah.
All right, just want to make sure. Thanks.
All right.
God bless.